The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at www.mtsu.edu/CEM. Welcome back to the 2024 School Counselors Collaborative in the Center for Educational Media at MTSU's College of Education. So, I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Keisha Napper to the screen now for her presentation. Dr. Napper is an educational advocate and special populations consultant in Rutherford County Schools. And her presentation today will be drawing on her work supporting children who experience homelessness. This is a topic that's been requested in our feedback from you, and Dr. Napper is an absolute perfect person to deliver some ideas for how to support these children. Dr. Napper, we are so happy you're here today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clark. I'm blessed and excited to be here. First and foremost, I think I'd be remiss if I did not say to all school counselors, happy National School Counseling Week. You are a vital part of our schools, and the work that you do is absolutely integral and needed. So I applaud you today and pretty much every day for your efforts in the way that you kind of move mountains inside of our schools. I watch it every day. So that's the first thing that I want to say. Secondarily, before we get started, I really just want to take a moment to kind of give you a sense of where we're going today, a loose roadmap or an overview of what things will look like. So, of course, initially this introduction piece here, but then we're going to kind of acquiesce into beginning with some goals that I have for this session. And as we walk through this piece here, I just want you to be mindful of what I'm talking about, but also how things look in your particular context. So as I share the content, I want to be thinking about ways that we can explore practical applications, broad, collaboratively, and in different contexts. So again, I just want to be thinking about how we can kind of journey towards supporting students as great as possible. And lastly, we will delve into questions and a bit of feedback. So as we are kind of journeying through some of this information, if you have a curiosity or noticing that pops up, write it down or put it in the chat rather, and we'll explore those later in the Q&A. So that's kind of a general overview of what we intend to do this morning, okay? So a little bit about me. I have been working in some aspect of education for the past 20 years. I have worked in general education, special education, PK-12 settings in suburban areas. I've done titled schools. I've done pretty much a little bit of everything in that respect, outside only a minute amount of rural, rather. I haven't done that as much, but I have been a teacher. I have been an interventionist. I have been a clinical mental health counselor, then acquiesced into school counseling. So I kind of have a sense of the work that goes on inside schools each and every day. I'm very excited about the opportunity that I have in my current role in educational advocacy, whereby I work to support students experiencing homelessness each and every day, but it's a collective undertaking. I don't do anything by myself. So I'm arm in arm with school counselors every day, administrators, stakeholders for education in any capacity. So that's a little bit about me professionally. Personally, I am married for more than 25 years. I have 3 spectacular young adult, I won't call them children, but young adults in my life. And life is just really good. And I'm just, again, so appreciative to be able to share a little bit about the work that I do and the work that you do on a daily basis. And hopefully together we can come up with some creative ideas and practical applications. So I know that we are in a virtual space. Anytime that I do a presentation, I always like to have a sense of who is in the room. My understanding is that there are counselors and educators and helpers from across the state. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, I want to say good morning And I'm excited to know that I'm speaking likely to a very diverse group of individuals, as are our students. They're also diverse. So we'll have a little bit of a time here. Okay, let's get started. So today's session is entitled From Here to There, Building Bridges for Students Experiencing Homelessness. So the goals for this session are few, but in the same, they're pretty deep because of the work that we are charged to do every day. It's important to heighten our awareness about students experiencing homelessness in every regard. And again, these are just going to be brief goals because we'll delve into a lot here. And I want you and myself, even every day, to understand more about the diversity of students' lived experiences. Although we're talking about a certain cadre of students, students experiencing homelessness indeed are not a monolith. So it's very important to see the diversity of the experiences. And as we go through, I'll even have some scenarios in here that you'll be able to maybe see and speak to. Lastly, I want us to be able to identify a few strategies and resources to support these students in collaboration with other stakeholders. So please be mindful that the content that I'm going to share with you is very much a primer in some respects because there's a lot of depth and breadth to this work. And again, nothing is the same. So it's kind of just a little something to give you a little added piece to your toolkit. If you needed something additional, maybe we can talk about that some other time in terms of how we can collaborate and work together. But these are just, I want you to have these in mind as we kind of go through today. So the first thing, when it comes to working with students experiencing homelessness in your schools, I want you to think first things first. And when I say that, I want you to know that even though you might have seen other students the day before, the year before, what you think is the same situation, we can't assume anything. Each and every situation is different. The population really cannot be put in a box. I've been doing this work in this particular context for about a decade. And I can tell you each week I learn something new. When I think I know something, something turns on me. We can never assume anything. So be mindful that each of these situations are just very, very different, although they look the same. There are going to be some similarities, but there's going to be a lot of differences. Secondarily, I want you to think, what are the most basic things that this student needs to be successful? What are the most basic things? And that's what I call first things first. Before we can even get to higher things, you need to think of those most basic things. And that's why I allude to Maslow's hierarchy. When I put Maslow to Bloom, you have to think about those most basic needs. So generally speaking, it's common sense primarily, but sometimes in the rush and the busyness of things, we sometimes get going and don't just stop and pause and think about the fact that if this student does not have the most basic food, clothing, shelter, safety, a sense of belonging, all of those things, as much as we can push in to provide support for that, if they don't inherently have those things first, they're not going to be available for learning. So although we are showing up to get them ready with, and get them in the classrooms where they can be available for learning and have these spectacular outcomes, we have to always think first things first. So I know counselors' minds, that's essentially what you do anyhow, but I know that sometimes our numbers are huge and we're having an increasing capacity with this population of students and things get going and moving. But brace yourself, pause, breathe, always think about the basics first. Important terminology that I want to explore, and I won't spend a whole bunch of time with, and I won't go into depth with these items, but these are terms that if you are students experiencing homelessness at this time in your school, you'll most certainly, if you are not delving into all of them, this slide and the preceding ones, and the ones coming thereafter, you're going to encounter it. McKinney-Vento Act, and we'll go further into that federal law. We know that's a federal mandate that kind of guides how we serve these students. Also, homelessness. When we speak of homelessness, there's more than one criteria that's spoken of in the world. In schools, we utilize the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness versus the one under HUD, and I'll speak more about that as we go along as well. Term doubled up. That's the majority of the students that are experiencing homelessness in schools. And again, I'm just kind of giving a brief overview right now. We're going to go into these a little bit more. But doubled up essentially means sharing the housing of others. And there are specific reasons that has to occur or does occur, and we'll delve into that a little bit more as well. Another term that you will often see is unaccompanied youth. So these are students or minors that are not in the legal custody of a parent or guardian at that time. So they might be unaccompanied for a host of reasons. Perhaps they've just been abandoned. Perhaps there's been some incarceration on behalf of a parent. There's a loss of housing, and there's been some displacement in the family unit. There are so many things that could cause this to be as well. So those are 3 initial terms that I want you to be mindful of if you are not already well aware. Some of you are well versed in that, and I understand, but there are a spectrum of individuals that serve these students. So if you are new, like when I started this workout, I was given a folder and said, this is my baby, essentially. And I had to do a lot of research, a lot of learning. And again, some may not be aware of the basics, but these are just kind of where we're getting started. And if you already know it, then that's spectacular, and kind of just follow along as well. Other terminology that we need to be mindful of is immigrant students, migrant students, refugee students, and I'll go to these terms a little bit later. But for the immigrants that we speak of, these are students that are not born in the U.S. and they have not been attending the U.S. school for at least 3 academic school years. That's the way it's defined under the way that we serve students. We also have students that are experiencing homelessness that come to us by way of migrancy. And more times than not, we're seeing a lot of shift with return in terms of mobility, high mobility, because of the working conditions, the seasonal nature of the work and things thereof. We have refugee students as well. And these are immigrant students that are usually unable to return to their home because of some level of persecution or something that has happened there. By definition, this is what we have under McKinney-Vento, under the students that we are serving. We are seeing high numbers come through daily of students that are just displaced in our care. And it's a very challenging time for them, because a lot of times that we're seeing, they are not even knowing the language. And they're a lot of times are disconnected from family, and what they know is familiar. And I think that a point to be made here is all of these students cannot be lumped in one. And there's a lot of cultural diversity amongst these students, despite the fact that sometimes we think it's just one group of students. It's not. There's a lot to be said for their heritage and culture. And again, just be mindful of those things that you're encountering those students. The terminology, unhoused, unsheltered, homeless, and in transition, we hear those a lot as well. And I'll speak a little bit more about those terms. And I want to speak to McKinney-Vento Act. That is the federal law that was established in 1987. And this is what guides our work with students, the basis of the mandates under this law. So under the basis of McKinney-Vento Act, we are charged to address and serve children who lack fixed, regular, and adequate housing. So when we say fixed, we mean it's absolutely unchanged. So these are students that you don't have to question where they're going to go the next day, if they're couch surfing, if they just have to figure it out. Regular, that consistency, the same place they can anticipate where they're going. Like when school is over, at the end of the day, it has to be consistent. And adequate. When we speak to adequacy, we speak of not just a dwelling, but being sufficient by law or reasonable. Maybe it's substandard housing. It's housing that's not made really for human habitation. We see that a lot of times as well. And we'll kind of I'll share a little bit more about that as we go along. So when I speak to those settings of students that we have to serve, the first one would be doubled up. And that, again, is sharing the housing of others. And since this is such a large category of our students, I'm going to address this even further in the subsequent slides. But additionally, settings that I see students live in every day are hotels, motels, campgrounds, trailers, tents, shelters, and transitional shelters based on different life circumstances. They live in parks, and that sounds pretty unbelievable. When I came to this work, I had a hard time believing it. We have a park here in town called Old Fort Park, and I had a student that requested that I bring him some food to the shelter at the park, and I couldn't quite understand. But there was a family where their children were actually living in the slide. So you'd be amazed about how these places are not habitable. But in addition to shelters and parks, people live in cars. Our students live in cars. They live in public spaces. And again, the substandard living is atrocious sometimes. There have been mobile homes without flooring, and animals can come up. There is just a host of conditions that our students are living in that we may not be cognizant of if we have not any lived experience in this capacity. Again, before I came to this work, this would have been unbelievable to me. I see this every day in the schools that I serve. And I imagine that many of you see this as well. So doubled up, when I speak of that term, again, I like to kind of put a pin here because that's the majority of the students that we do serve, although there are plenty of others. Those students are living in situations that they're sharing homes, but there's a couple of doubled up scenarios that I would like to give you because they're not all one. Some are doubled up by necessity. And when I say that, they have a financial hardship, perhaps they've been evicted, they've had a health situation or crisis whereby they are unable to work now or even unable to be physically able to do what they used to do. They've experienced job loss. They may have had to flee due to domestic violence. They have possibly had a natural disaster they left from. That could be in the United States, domestically or abroad. We've seen a lot of that as well. Also, safety issues. Beyond domestic violence, there are other issues of safety that people have the need to leave so that they can make it day by day. And there are many more issues that perhaps you've seen in your context and I have not experienced. But this is when we certify students or we enroll them under the banner of McKinney-Vento by virtue of being doubled up because it's necessary that they're in that situation. They did not choose to be in that situation. Secondarily, some people are actually doubled up by convenience, and that sounds kind of strange. But the reality is you can find families that are living together and it has nothing to do with safety issues. It has nothing to do with financial hardship. They've done so because it's relative to their living situation. Some are more communal in nature. So some families have chosen just to live together. I've encountered divorced individuals who have maybe moved to the area with a parent, and we thought initially perhaps they were in need of some kind of additional support, but actually this person made six figures and decided they were going to live at home with their parents so that their children could be, taken care of by the retired grandparents while they're there. That's not out of necessity. That's by convenience. So if you do kind of like a little barometer when students walk in, if you find out initially that they are doubled up, you can kind of get a sense, is this by necessity or is it by virtue of convenience? Do they have a choice? Do they have other options? Do they have access to other means of living? So those are really important distinctions to make. I know when I first came to this work, when you say doubled up, they told you shared housing with others, and without some level of personal education, I would not have been able to delineate the two. But there is something that you can look at and kind of think, okay, let me ask myself this question. Is this absolutely out of necessity, or is there some level of convenience attached to that? Those are important distinctions that you can make when you do your work. It'll help to guide your decision-making process. So what is the issue? Certainly not always students are going to be having a hard time in school, but so many barriers exist that impede the success of students experiencing homelessness just by virtue of their living situation. I want everyone to really understand that poverty, it's challenging, absolutely, but homelessness is distinctly more challenging in that the depth and breadth of the issues are so much greater. They extend that which you know when it comes to poverty. When I came to this work, I was doing some level of training with poverty as well. And you get a sense from being in different schools, you can experience poverty in an urban school, a rural school, even affluent schools. You might have some misnomers and a few people that are still having some challenges and are still attending that zone school. But homelessness has a host of issues, and we'll go into it as we go through the session, that are really just unimaginable if you have not that lived experience. So again, you want to understand that poverty and homelessness are not exactly the same. There's some similarities, but it far exceeds that of poverty. And again, we'll look at that a little bit later. Lifespan issues. Those are serious challenges as it relates to students experiencing homelessness. Now, when I say lifespan challenges, you probably think, what exactly do I mean? By virtue of their living situation and the way that they have to navigate life, you will also see that there's some deficit in terms of potentially food security. Food insecurity exists for individuals experiencing homelessness. So attached to that, you might have poor health. Attached to that, your inability to actually go to the doctor and have health care could be another barometer. The fact that you're living in a high-stress situation might increase the likelihood of you experiencing some mental health challenges because you're always on. Even when you don't want to, that fight or flight exists for these students so much so. You see them in front of you, they could be smiling, but the wheels are churning because they're thinking about life and survival. So all of those health-related issues are interconnected when it comes to experiencing poverty. So on the outset, you might not think about all the layers associated with that, but certainly lifespan issues are impacted here. And also, as it relates to education, by virtue of the way that they have to live, oftentimes that transience that and high mobility that exists, it impacts school because then we have attendance and all these other pieces. Again, we'll talk more about this at the end, but lifespan issues are also inherent for most people that are experiencing homelessness. And certainly negative educational outcomes. And I want to emphasize here, this is not a one size fits all. Everyone is not going to have these challenges in school. There are going to be some students that are somehow they're so resilient. This population, I want to say, is so resilient that you will see them press on and do well and seemingly in virtually every area of their life, and they can compartmentalize the homelessness that they're experiencing. But more times than not, you will see the negative educational outcomes. Even if it's just a barrier to get to school, to be present for learning, you'll see that as well. So I don't in any way want to say or allude to the fact that if you are experiencing homelessness, that you won't do well educationally. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that the issues are there that make it much more challenging. And the barriers really do impede success most times. So when I speak of what's the issue and the barriers related to learning, the fact that the likelihood of homelessness is increased by 4.5 times just by virtue of not finishing high school. And that leads to adult homelessness is alarming. And that's, however, where we can kind of step in and add support and bring value. The school setting and what we do there and what the teachers and all the stakeholders do. And we'll speak to that, but just that's an issue. And it's something that we can kind of help. Additionally, an issue is the growing numbers of individuals that we are finding in schools that are experiencing homelessness. And we'll talk more about the numbers and also the vulnerable subpopulations. Again, you can be under a lot of categories and banners with respect to being in a homeless situation. It's not just all students. You have students that are ELL. You have kids that are in special education. You have so many layers, and you could be in more than one category at a time. So the barriers are then enhanced, which is not a good word to use for that, but it's true. So it's very challenging. So all these issues, it's layer upon layer that we need to be mindful of. So that's why, again, I say that you can't look at this cadre of individuals and say, oh, I have the answer. Because again, they're not a monolith. There's so much more depth to them. It's a diversity of things. Okay, so the context, I alluded to the growing numbers. In 2021, they were able to, let's say, hey, the researchers and the homelessness advocates, and they wanted to make sure the numbers were out there, were able to find more than 1.5 million children and youth as being identified as experiencing homelessness. And that's just in public schools. And I just want to make it clear, I don't mean that there's only 1.5 million children, only the ones that were actually enrolled and identified in public schools. So there's students in our schools right now, unfortunately, that maybe aren't even identified. We know they exist. But even just the ones that have been identified, we could say there's over 1.5 million of those students as of 2021. And I would suggest that perhaps the numbers are even higher if we could have a to-date count, because the pandemic has been so impactful that in our local context, in our state context, we are seeing the numbers that are just, they're disheartening. In the state of Tennessee, they're growing, but even locally, like in the context that I work, by December of this year, I could feel the weight of the work that I do because we were able to look at the data and see that we had 45% more students enrolled in McKinney-Vento serving programs by mid-year than we did last year. That's alarming. It's a concern. It's needful of so much attention. It's a huge haul. And that's why the work that you do every day, the work that we join arms with to do with others is so very important. The collaborative nature of what's needed is huge because no one can do it by themselves. It's such a collaborative undertaking. It's a bit daunting, but again, when you're committed to this work and serving these students, I know that you'll do what you can. Again, speaking to the context, I don't know the regional numbers, but again, we have to be considerate of those rural areas, those urban areas, and those suburban areas. And I would be grateful for whoever does all the statistics to be able to look at those numbers and pull them together and let us disaggregate the data. It's huge. It's important to know that in terms of context and provides information and informs the way we serve. So if anyone out there works in that context, by all means, it would be so great to be able to do that. So again, the vulnerability for all these populations exists in all kinds of contexts, all across this state and every state, really, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. With respect to the subpopulations, their challenges are often greater than students that are just experiencing homelessness without any added information that we have at schools. And I'll kind of go a little bit further with these next slides with respect to the greater challenge and how they're heightened and how they are manifested in society. But with respect to the challenges, we also have household income. That's a real challenge in so many ways. Some people experiencing homelessness, most of my populations do actually work. And that's a stigma attached to them that's not even true. They work. But I will say a lot of the people that I serve, their household incomes are below the poverty level. So with that being the case, I mean, I work full time. You all work full time. The fact that we are impacted by inflation and the prices that are going on, imagine how doubly impactful it would be if you're already struggling. I mean, I've made decisions just by going to the store and I looking at something for the price of Costco, and I'm like, I usually get those organic eggs, but this week they're $11 and I might pass. But some people don't even make an $11 an hour. So again, just being mindful of the context and the subpopulation that you serve. Race and ethnicity are very impactful, and also immigration status as it comes to experiencing homelessness. And you would probably think, well, why would that even be more so? Unfortunately, but realistically, there's a lot of inherent discrimination that exists worldwide within our country without experiencing homelessness and having these labels, which I really don't care for, attached to you. But the reality is they often make things even more challenging if you are experiencing homelessness and you're a person of color, or your status of immigration is different. There's so many pieces to this puzzle. Additionally, if you're in special education, if you're unaccompanied youth, if you are a migrant student, there's so many pieces to subpopulations that are enhanced challenges. Also, we have students that are pregnant. That's an enhanced challenge, additional challenge. Educational level of the student and or the parent sometimes can be a barrier. And also the sexual orientation of a student. And I do want to show a graphic here that speaks to the degree to which particular subpopulations are even at greater risk of homelessness. This research was done by the University of Chicago, Chapin Hall, and they do great research. That's a resource you might want to pin if you ever need any more information on homelessness and how to help students in your context. But they did this research, and it's just phenomenal, but it's also breathtaking in the worst possible way to know that youth with less than a high school diploma experience a 346% higher increase the probability of experiencing homelessness. That's just staggering just to think that. Youth with the reported annual household of less than $24,000, they're at 162% greater risk of experiencing homelessness in adulthood. Black or African-American youth have an 83% higher risk of experiencing homelessness. LGBTQ youth, 120% higher risk. Hispanic and non-white youth, 33% higher risk. And then unmarried parenting youth have a 200% higher risk. Now, just looking at this, it's alarming. It takes your breath away. But when I look at this, I'm thinking I can point to multiple students in every category as we speak right now, unless we turn it around by virtue of helping with that education piece. I've seen students and their parents have not even finished. So they're having that cycle that continues and has not been broken thus far. But again, I charge us and I challenge us to show up and do the work that we do every day in the best possible way with the most fidelity so that we can turn some of this around and really just be a difference maker in the context of our local spaces and even greater worldwide. We have the potential to make a global impact. And I know it sounds like, oh, that's audacious thinking, but it's true. With the work that we do, with the education we have, with the hearts and passion that we present and do our work, we have the capacity to make a change in these areas. But I think it's important for us to kind of just sit there and look at that and think, that's day in and day out. That's day in and day out. So what is the answer to all of this? Of course, there's absolutely no magic bullet, because if there is, I would have already done what we could do. You would have done what we can do, and it would be a wrap. But the reality is education is powerful. This is where we come in, because we're in these systems and we work together. Education can absolutely break the cycle of homelessness. And I've seen it, and it's so very exciting to see when one student can change the entire trajectory of their family tree. Like, it's just amazing to see. And I'm not going to stay here too long, but just thinking now about a particular student who was the first in a number of generations of family to be able to graduate from one of our local high schools. And it was time for graduation. I would have thought that it was the entire graduation party. There was probably a dozen cars But they were so very proud. This was the first person in the family that was shifting it and was able to go to college and do something else. So again, besides bringing great pride, it's just doing something generationally and societally, that just changes things. So education is absolutely the key to helping students experiencing homelessness. Again, not to take away anything else that's needful that we do as counselors, all of it's needful, but this right here provides just the greatest impact. So I alluded to earlier some of these names that we need to know. And you said, what's in a name? Whether I am speaking somewhere, whether I am talking to a parent, I am interviewing someone for research, whether I'm volunteering, it does not matter. It does not fail. There's always an individual or several that say to me that they do not like to be called homeless. Now, I know that that's a shift for a lot of people, but I'm all about people first language and also dignifying and respecting people who have expressed to me as a concern. And the reason being is because they feel that they're put in a box, that it's a label, and so very much stigma is attached to it. When people think of the word homeless, if you say someone is homeless rather than experience, people often think of people on the street, maybe someone laying on the side, maybe with a brown bag, all of these connotations that aren't necessarily the case, but a lot of people find it quite defining. It's their situation. It's not who they are. They're experiencing something. Hopefully they're going through it. It's a label. And again, the stigma that's attached to it, it really just makes it very challenging for people to accept that and embody that. So again, I know that unhoused is used, unsheltered, homeless, and transition, I've found many people have been okay with that. But when they speak of homelessness, it's been an issue. So for me, respectfully, I say experiencing homelessness to dignify those who I serve, those who I volunteer and work with. And that's just a little food for thought. Again, even though some of the slides that I will have coming and some of the videos, the videographers and producers, they still use the word homeless. And some people even still say, I'm homeless, and that's their prerogative. But for me, just knowing that it impacts anyone adversely, I don't want to speak in such a manner. So you will hear me with all of these words saying experiencing homelessness over and over because it's important to me. I bring value there when people are concerned about that. So again, I just wanted to share that little tidbit. So legal responsibility. So in schools, we are required to follow the McKinney-Vento law, and it does have mandates attached to it. So these are identification. We have to identify every student that we are aware of that is experiencing homelessness. We also have to make sure that there is immediate enrollment for these families when they come to us. I guess I'll stop here for a minute. I have versus services. You're thinking, what is that? We have to enroll them and we have to be able to make services available. However, they are able to actually refuse services that we are able to provide them. I've seen it happen. Some by virtue of just pride, discomfort, don't want to be singled out, and that's fine. But although you don't have to force the services on them, you are required by law to yet identify them. So there is a distinction that's important to know. So they have to be identified. They do not have to take your services. I've sometimes had counselors contact me and say, I'm sending this food home with them and I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and the parents are mad. They've told me no, and they feel like they're doing what's best for them. No means no in any capacity, and they don't have to take that. And it's always available to them. So I've seen it also where people have refused it initially, but maybe a month or two down the road and they're really struggling and need some support, they know they can come to you. So be a soft place to fall there. So don't just be so, abrasive with that, and just let them know that you're still there. And if they change their mind, that they can come back and ascertain the services that are legally available to them. So they don't have to be forcing them, and don't just drop stuff off the kiddos. By all means, know that that's there. So again, we have to identify them. We have to enroll them immediately. And we have to implement procedures to remove barriers for these students. That looks like a lot of things in a lot of different contexts. I think you have to think about where you are, what your school looks like. I think you very well have a sense of the barriers that might be there. Sometimes we might have someone at the front office that makes decisions. And I don't mean like administration, maybe like a secretary or someone who's been there a long time, who has a great sense of pulse on the school and maybe feels confident that they can do that. That's not their job. A person who has been trained to take care of these students and understand the law. Now, I will say, sometimes it is a person at the front office that has been trained to do so, but you need to be trained to make these kind of decisions. And in terms of removing barriers, that might be one of them. Sometimes it's at the front door or asking for an affidavit when in fact, all the signs lead to the fact that they're experiencing homelessness. We don't need to put a roadblock there. We need to take care of people. Also, our legal responsibility is to ensure school stability in as much as possible. And I say in as much as possible because I know that's very much linked to transportation, which I hear over and over again is a challenge to get connected when students are very highly mobile. Now, if students have transients and they've moved to different parts of town, sometimes it's hard to get a bus to them. I do understand that. You have to think of best interest when it comes to that kind of situation. And what I mean by that, overall, if the student has been there for several years and is just carrying on and has made friends and connections, you want to be able to kind of preserve that normalcy and those relationships and things that are there for them, the sports, the friends, the teachers, as much as possible. But there are some times that it doesn't always make sense. And what I mean by that is you have a family that maybe moves, I don't know, very often, and it will require you to put a child on a bus maybe at 5:30 in the morning. And this is not a stretch because this has happened where I am. If this child is in first grade, you really want to weigh that. What is in the best interest of the student? Will that day be so taxing on that student? What is going to be the ramifications of such things? Are they going to move back and you're sure of it and it's going to be helpful to them? Or is this student a senior in the same scenario? The bus comes at 5:30 a.m., but they're a senior in high school and they've been going to the school for several years. They want to graduate their class. Like really make great sense because they know the sacrifice that'll be made and they're willing to do so. But the taxing of a first grader or a second grader with 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours after school for the necessity of being to the school that's right there versus a high schooler who has a lot of foreknowledge and decided to do that for a reason will be different. So again, nothing's the same. And parents and families are a part of these conversations. We're not just making decisions for them, but it's important to look at the best interest all the way down, every piece, socially, emotionally, physically, all those pieces. You want to be considerate when you make decisions for families like that, or I would say with. I hope you're not making them just for. I hope you're making them with. Additionally, our legal responsibility is for the academic success of students. So we're going to help them in those classes. We're going to make sure they have the services that they need, if there's tutoring, whatever that is. And in parentheses, I put high school and beyond, because McKinney-Vento law is necessary and required through 12th grade. Absolutely. After they go to college, you don't have McKinney-Vento mandating anything for these students per se. But the fact that we are so concerned with students, you are so concerned with students, you're going to be forward thinking and you're going to be thinking about beyond. You're going to think about careers. You're going to think about college. You're going to be thinking about transition planning. I want that to always be in the forefront of your mind. I'm going to say the back of your mind, in the forefront, because although not required, it's needful. So always be thinking about that for our students. And so I just want to pause right here and have a few questions for consideration. And this is just for you. Obviously, you're not going to be able to talk back with me, but it's important to reflect. I think as educators, as counselors, reflection is always super important. So I ask, do you feel prepared to serve students experiencing homelessness? What do you need to know more about to support these students that are experiencing homelessness? What are you doing that's working? That's super important. I know we always try to, look at the challenges, which is important to do because we know that informs something else. But what are you doing that's working? I think it's important to not only lift that up in your space, but share that with other practitioners and be very collaborative in that respect so that we can all, help students on their way to success. And also, what challenges do you have? That's a very real concern because we want to be able to speak to those. So these are questions for your consideration as we go through. And once we're even through, if there's still questions in that regard, these are very important. So all experiences are not the same as we've noted before with respect to these situations that we've encountered. And I really just want to give voice to some of the students and share some of the videos here that are going to be relative to some of the situations that they actually live in. There's going to be a series of a few videos, not back to back, so we'll have a little space there. But I want you to kind of be mindful and to consider their living experiences, and it'll help us to better understand, I'm hoping, by virtue of looking. So please be mindful that the next set of videos is going to be depictions, and they're unfiltered and they're not audacious by any means, but I want to share that they're the experiences of the individuals as they live them day to day. So they're not meant to trigger anyone or make you uncomfortable, but please govern yourself as needed. I want to say that because I know that we're all different and we receive things differently. Okay.
We've lived in a homeless shelter.
Yep.
We've lived in a tent in the middle of someone's yard.
Yep. We've slept in a car before.
At first, being a kid, it was fun because I got to go to the new places. Who doesn't want to go to a new state and, be able to say I've been to Florida and Texas and Mass and Louisiana and things like that, and just to say I did it. But after a while, when you stay there, you make friends and you actually get used to it. To have to pick up and move out of nowhere and start all over and have like 6 or 7 separate set of friends in different states, not be able to have any contact with them, having to pick up and start over, be the new kid, it's like where does it end?
Last year, I was absent like 70 days out of the whole year. Because at the time, I had to put school aside and find a way to support myself. It's really hard to balance those two out.
I just think there's a lot of preconceived notions that people have about homeless youth, and I think a bunch of them are wrong. We have to figure out how we're gonna eat tomorrow or where we're gonna stay tomorrow.
I feel like I've been on my own since I was 16. I feel like I've been bouncing around since then.
It sounds sad, but I've learned to be an adult very young. It's hard because you have to act like an adult, and you're put in a situation where you have to figure out where you're gonna go, so you can't make those adult decisions legally, so you're kind of just stuck. You just have to be stuck until you're 18, until you can figure out what to do.
Being homeless and not having a place kind of messes with you. Because I was homeless, school was really bad. I was a very troubled child then. I don't know, you just couldn't really focus on school when you're homeless. It's hard. Because when you think about you just constantly think about things when you're homeless. You don't know what's gonna happen next. So honestly, I have to take it day by day. Because I don't know what the next day is gonna bring me.
I'm probably in every little list inside of a school. I'm probably the homeless girl, you know what I mean? And that's probably how they perceive me, but I don't want to be that. And I appreciate all their help. I don't like when other people know I need things. I know the school district and everything, they have their eyes on me. They're gonna know. For the school to give me clothes or food and to have it sitting in a bag next to me in class after I just got called down from the office, it's like a punch in the face. Because I'm not just a homeless kid. I'm really not.
I'm broken down so many times, it's crazy, dude. I've cried so much because I feel so stuck and I don't know what to do. And it's the fact that me and her are literally on our own. My parents don't live in the state. It's just literally me and my sister, and that's all we have. I just feel like people don't understand jumping house to house and
I think people have this perspective. There are some kids that, yeah, they're running from home, but there's a reason why they can't be home, And sometimes the streets might feel a lot safer than being at home.
all I can do is cry because I don't know what else to do.
I want to say that this is actually a very typical example of unaccompanied youth that I encounter most days in my high schools. And this is what they go through on a daily basis. We don't necessarily think about the fact that when the day is over, that some students literally don't have any parental supervision nor concern for the fact that they are experiencing homelessness. Oftentimes, I have parents that will literally decide they don't want to parent anymore. They will move out of the state. They will leave their students there. We have families where the parents don't work and they actually don't choose to sometimes, and they just are wherever they are. Students will encounter their parents at stores or when they text them or let them know they're needed. It's kind of unfathomable. But a lot of the attendance issues, a lot of the truancy, sometimes it's our kids that are at work because they have to find a way to provide for themselves, as this young lady spoke to. Another salient point, I think they said that they appreciate the help, but the way that it's given is really important. I know that we have lots of food programs with all school counselors. We do that. You provide it in schools, usually on Fridays. You'll give a weekend bag or food or something of that nature. It's important to make sure that dignity is given when you do it. They spoke to the fact that they get their bags and clear bags sometimes that everyone knows are called down at a certain point. I've seen this as well. I've spoken to people about this, and we've really tried to stop that practice. But I know that in general, it still exists in some places because maybe the heart is not yet connected to it. We need to ensure that our heart is connected to this work, and just think if that were you, if that were your child, if it were someone, and it shouldn't take all of that, but if it does, I ask you to do that because it's important to have value, but add dignity when you're serving people. So just think about the way you do things. And also, it's important to ask them what they want and what they need, because it may not be food this week that I need. So perhaps when I say no to the food, it's because I actually don't need it. Maybe someone was generous and gave me something, or, it could be a host of conditions, but please don't assume. And I go back to over and over, because someone is experiencing homelessness, don't always think they need a food bag, or don't always think they need something else. Ask people what they need. Ask them what they need, and they will tell you. So I think this really helps us to remember the importance of student voice, but I also think it highlights the importance of mental health and social emotional learning, all those pieces, with all students, of course, but with and for these students particularly. So please pay attention to what's going on with these students. And again, this speaks to the collaborative nature of your stakeholdership, because you're on the front lines in one capacity, but in classrooms, teachers are on the front lines. So I'm asking you to have those conversations with those teachers to say, hey, are you seeing any behaviors? Is there something verbally or non-verbally that's happening in class? We're all just working together, kind of be eyes and ears to find a way to provide support and wrap love around these students. But we're not the only ones. But again, the collaborative nature will help you know, because sometimes a student might come to your office and present okay, but the teacher could tell you they're sleeping all day or they're having outbursts and challenges with other kids. We don't know, but just pay attention. When I say pay attention, I'm not just saying just to you, to all those that you collaborate with, to all those that you work alongside. Make sure there's linkages there so that you can get that information, because there's so many pieces of data that are important. Also, I would ask that you just really ensure that you're communicating honestly with them. No false promises. I've seen that sometimes when people are down in the dumps because they can't come through with what they want to. It sounds spectacular to be able to do some things. I do a lot in a day, and I wish that I could do more, but I certainly won't tell them that I can do something that I know that I can't fulfill as a counselor. We do tons of things, but there's some things just so without the bounds of what we're able to do. We don't have the capacity to make it happen. If we do, we certainly will, and that's a bonus, but don't speak to something that you're not going to be able to do, because these students are quite vulnerable with respect being let down more times than not, and not having stability, and we don't want to add anything to that. So again, communicate honestly, but also allow them to do the same with you, to give them a space to be. And I always think SBA, strengths-based approach, when you're seeing students, you want to do that. They're quite resilient. They've got a lot of things knocked against them, but I speak to those strengths and the things that are possible for them. Super, super important. Also, going along with that mental health and that social emotional piece, you want to encourage and support the student in the way that's deemed best for them. So again, I don't know how many times I can say, because I've just seen it over and over. There's no Band-Aids for anything, but we want to provide encouragement and support. And what I think is really impactful, particularly as they get to those late middle school, high school years, is to help them see themselves beyond now. Help them have a future story. Because sometimes when life is really challenging, even as adults, you can't see out of the space that you're in. But if you help to usher in a future story, it gives energy to their lives. It gives them something forward thinking to be thinking about. It empowers them to a growth mindset. It just taps into their resilience in a way that perhaps they couldn't do on their own. Sometimes people have to tell you who you are, how spectacular you are, how strong you are, how capable you are. Use your voice, use your energy, use what you have, your power, your influence as a school counselor, and empower them. That's what we do, empower them in that space. So another thing that I found really helpful when I was a school counselor, now it's very hard, I know everyone's going to say, to have any sort of groups. But sometimes, in the middle school especially, you can facilitate some sort, it doesn't have to be all the time. And I'm not saying this is the homeless club, nothing like that. I'm talking about universal issues, anxiety groups. Who doesn't encounter that in any sphere of life? Those are important. Anger management groups, even things like kindness groups, kindness clubs, all those pieces are super helpful. I've seen it in middle school and high school. And it might sound a little interesting at the onset, but if at all you're able to do that, I mean, they never want to be brought all in one room and, and identified by virtue of that. But I've found that if I do it under the banner of another group, my students will come and they share with each other and they have one another for support, and no one has to be outed. So if you can do it under the banner of something that's more universal, like anxiety, as I alluded to, super helpful, super helpful, super helpful. Specifics for counselors, but certainly everybody who wants to make a difference. I want to say that the need to advocate is there every day. Within your school, outside of your school, advocate, advocate, advocate. And to our counselors, to the counselors, I know that this is ASCA aligned because you are social justice advocates. This is one of those groups that you're going to they need advocacy because a lot of times their voice is not heard, or maybe they don't even lift it. But if you have knowledge of what's going on, lift their voice. Also, it is imperative that we maintain confidentiality. Again, I know that's part of the banner, what we're supposed to do as being school counselors. But unfortunately, I will share that I know that there have been times when people have shared information. Now, with me, I could be a safe person because I'm in a consultative major and manner when I'm dealing with people. But you don't need to tell the next teacher and the next person and the next person and the next person. Nobody unnecessary needs to have knowledge of the student's information. Of course, teachers that are serving these students and direct people that need to know, but don't mishandle their information just because you can explain it away. Please honor the information that's been given to you and maintain their confidentiality on a need-to-know basis only. And again, just to commit to that, and you'll not only build trust, but maintain it and speak to serving these students at the highest level. Academic considerations are really huge because, again, we know that education is the piece that helps to break the cycle. So I want us to always keep in mind that high mobility often causes academic issues. And with that, you often see attendance and truancy issues or concerns. Also, achievement and intervention concerns. Remember that students often get lost in the shuffle. So the needs are very, very high when you're living in these type of lifestyle situations. So again, just those supports that you can provide, that tutoring, those groups, those individualized plans, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about individualized plans a little bit later, but just be mindful of academic concerns and things that are heightened amongst our general population that you'll see with these students that are experiencing homelessness. So I'm going to go ahead and share another scenario. Again, these are all realistic. These are things I see every day. I imagine you see them in your context as well. And some of them may be new to you, but it's important to be mindful of them because if you haven't seen it and you're serving this population, it's certainly coming. So let's take a look at another situation.
I try to stay positive. We fell behind on the rent and we were evicted. But when we became homeless, it was my husband and I, 5 kids, 1, 5, 7, 9, 14, and then we have the dog. So we lived in our minivan for close 7 or 8 days. No matter how tired I was, I could not sleep because it wasn't safe. It was dangerous. I think the hardest thing was the baby, trying to keep her calm. The other kids were okay, but I hope that one day they forget it. But at the time, they thought it was a little vacation. They didn't understand. Thank God they didn't understand. And they still don't really understand. They still think it's a vacation. Trying to stay clean was a struggle. From being in the vehicle for even a week, when I walk into a gas station or a restaurant or a store to take the kids, we're disheveled. We catch people's attention. During that time, that emergency shelter services paid for 1 week in the hotel. We were still considered homeless, and we were told that if we were to find housing during that week, that we would get help with rent and security and with housing. That didn't happen. They weren't able to find anything for us. We weren't able to find anything on our own. And we've been in the hotel ever since. But it's hard. There's no privacy. There's just not any space. Now it hurts us too, because everywhere we apply, we're being told no, we're being turned away because of our credit. The shelters just don't have any space, and we have yet to find a shelter that has room for our family. There's no family shelter availability. There's shelters for women with children, and then there's shelters for men, but that divides our family. I think the problem with housing is, people realize that we are homeless. We have to put the hotel for our current address, and it makes me feel helpless and hopeless all over again every time I have to go into the hotel and tell them I don't have enough to pay and think that we may be back in a vehicle again. The first week that we were in the hotel that was paid for by emergency shelter services, we were still considered homeless, so that gave us a lot more help. But now, even that we're in the hotel, it's just, we live there. The other thing that has kept us from housing is needing birth certificates for all the kids, which we lost in our eviction. We've lost our spot on waiting lists for housing because I didn't have birth certificates. Like, the agencies need it right now in order to process your housing with HUD. So that's been a huge barrier for us, is just needing the birth certificates. I don't have them, and I haven't had the funds to get them, and I haven't yet found anybody that can help us get them. I try so hard to keep just some sort of routine, which is almost impossible, and just try to keep positive. And every time I have the chance, we spend our whole day just playing at the park or whatever I need to do to just bring normal back into their lives until we have routine and structure like we should again. We've already hit rock bottom. We've been as low as we can be, and really all we can do is build at this point. And I am working a lot, and as soon as we land a house, apartment, whatever it is, that my husband can start working, we can do childcare, the kids will be in school, and then everything will turn around and get put back together. It's just this struggle of getting to that point.
And I know that the last slide let you know it's a little dated, but the reality is this is an increasingly typical situation that I am seeing, that I'm probably sure you are seeing post-pandemic. There are not any legal protections at this juncture for how high landlords can put rents in some areas. There are so many evictions that are just trickling now. They had protections before, and now we are seeing an influx of students and families that really have nowhere to go, that are living in cars, that are living, a lot of them in motels. That's true. Substandard, really, to me, in most ways, where they're staying. But this is really quite unimaginable for us, but is their day-to-day reality. Like when you hear her say, I have a 1-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 14-year-old, a dog, myself, and my husband, that gives me pause. Just that, in one room. I mean, if you have a house, to me, that's a lot. It's a lot of energy. We need to be able to separate sometimes. That many people in one room. The fact that they don't have the ability to take care of themselves in the way that they need to, it's certainly disarming and alarming. But again, I want you to be cognizant of, these are the students and families that you're serving. So when they come to you, this is just another side. So we've just seen a few scenarios, and they're all different in some way. So I want to reiterate my initial statement and highlight the fact that it is important to understand the barriers associated with students' living situations. So again, homelessness is one thing, but the actual living situation adds something else, another dimension to that which you need to consider. So barriers by living situation, again, we talked about it being very varied over and over, and they're going to be different, but understanding really is key. And that's another reason that I'm kind of showing some of these scenarios, because you'll see little nuances in each one that speak to maybe the way that you serve students or things that were required in students that maybe they actually don't have the capacity to get. It's not that they're being resistant or non-compliant. Sometimes they just don't have the capacity to respond in the way that you want them to. And you think that everyone can. But I want you to see these situations, see these pictures, hear these voices, so that you know that sometimes it's not even possible. Not in the moment, it's not possible. So let's go ahead and look at another scenario and ask you to be thinking about ways to provide support for these families in each of the contexts. So sometimes looking from the outside really helps. We think we know, but we just don't always know.
I am not a gap in the system. I am not in the system. That's right. I am not even counted as homeless because I don't fit the definition. If not having a home or a place to lay down my family's heads does not make me homeless, what does?
I've been staying from hotel to hotel for almost 3 months. I done spent over $8,000 paying for hotels. My children got in trouble with police issues. Had nothing to do with the residents, and I lost my place for that. I lost my Section 8 for that.
And as I'm buying the ice cream, my husband starts calling me, and he just keeps calling. And I was checking out, so I answered the phone rudely and said, "I hate when you do that. I'm clearly busy." And he said, "Sarah, stop. The house is on fire. Come home." And then when I pulled up, of course, everybody's out at their house looking at our house, and our house is burning down. So just like that, we were homeless.
I had a house, but I ended up moving out of the house because the landlord was a slumlord, and he wasn't fixing anything. So I had to go stay with my mom.
So I got in trouble. We had to move out the place that we lived in for 7, 8 years. I was incarcerated. My son was forced to go live with his mother.
And thankfully for Red Cross, they have a program and you get like $100 per person. We did call every organization that is there to help people, but we got a no every single time. There was not one place that helped us with anything. Not even a list of like what's it, like there just is nothing available. There's no programs just because your house burned down. There's just nothing. We proceed to have a year and a half of Al. So my brother was nice enough to let us sleep on his couch. But again, there's 7 of us. So we stayed with him for a few weeks. My husband's aunt called us crying and actually begged us to live with her. And she had a really nice, huge, nice house. And we could go back to normalcy. And as soon as we actually had our stuff there, it was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It was the most disturbing month of my life. And then we ended up with my mom in a 2-bedroom trailer. But she likes to go to bed at 6 o'clock at night. But whatever, it worked. I'm certainly not going to complain about it because we would have had nowhere.
It was hard. I mean, she had a 3-bedroom house, but it was hard because we was all in one room because there was other people staying with her too. The room was a lot smaller than this room.
I'm trying to keep a job, be homeless, maintain my children and myself at the same time, look for a place, do this, do that. You can't do all that.
We stayed with my mom for a year and 2 months. My kids were so good. They knew it was a situation for everybody. Like, they had no personal space, no private space, unless you shut the bathroom door. But you couldn't do that for long because there's only one bathroom. You know, they were all sharing a room. Technically, there was 5 kids in a bedroom. I could have probably had them taken from me. Like, you're walking on eggshells the whole time. You don't want to upset the person whose house you're taking over. And because there's 7 of us, we really are taking over their house. Of course, at some point, my kids will fight. And then, are they going to be mad and kick us out? And you know it's temporary, so you don't want to get too comfy. So you're kind of just in limbo waiting for something. Because who wants to rent to someone with 5 kids?
It's not easy living in a hotel and not having a lot of space. It's very hard.
I've filled out application after application after application, and every time it's a turn down. It's either the credit, or I got a bad reference from the landlord.
I'm looking, but it's been hard, especially me having eviction on my background. And the credit thing is a big deal too.
I have a small storage unit with all of the clothes and shoes and other items, and what's not in storage is in my van. The storage unit is $55 a month. It's still taking money that could be used for other things. But if I don't want to lose any of my items, I have to pay it. Men's papers, birth certificates, social security, tax papers, everything. My life. In my van and my storage unit. My life.
I have stuff in storage. It's like $59. All 4 of my kids are in school. Yeah, they love their school. I appreciate anything that they do for us.
The schools have been amazing to my kids. They've helped them. Unfortunately, my older ones are not bonded with anybody. They don't really have friends. We stayed with my mom for a year and 2 months in a little 2-bedroom trailer that was extremely difficult. My mom likes her own space. She'd gotten used to being alone, but she did her best and she was very welcoming to us. This town is really hard to find a place to live, especially for my family size. Like, you just can't find houses for rent.
Now, I promised God, I said, hey, if I'm able to get back to my son, I will sacrifice whatever it is to make sure that I can provide a safe space for my son at all costs. And that's what I did. I was determined to do whatever was necessary to make sure that I can provide a safe space for me and my son in a better life, the legal way.
And I'm not the only family that's homeless. I have ran across a lot of families that are homeless in these hotels that I go to, and I feel so bad.
I'm gonna try to look into like housing or Section 8 or something. Maybe if I try to stay in a shelter or something, maybe that will help better my situation and get into housing.
The hardest for me is not being able to walk up to the door and put a key in to a place of my own. Sometimes I don't know if I'm coming or going. But I don't know any other way but to be strong for my children, because if I'm not strong for them, then nobody's any good.
Having a place where my son is safe, where he can come home and feel good. He can come home to his bedroom, his own room, his own space, and feel good, So, yeah, that right there means a lot. That means a lot to me. And I know it means a lot to him.
I'm going to stop it there. I want to say that, again, this is actually quite typical in the day-to-day, likely that you experience, but certainly what I experience. The hotel living has increased exponentially, and the price of hotels, I don't know if there's any cap in sight. We had families that were living in hotels last year, but they paid $1,000 to $1,100 a month. This year, the average for students that I serve between $1,500 to $1,700 a month to stay in a hotel room. It's alarming, knowing that they're being victimized again in some ways because they know that there's evictions or credit issues that will preclude them from doing anything else. Some of these hotels that even provide like continental breakfast don't do that for our families anymore, which seems like, how does that make sense? I had a student in one of my high schools, and he came and he was exhausted, and he said, "Hey, Dr. Napper, do you have a snack?" I was like, "I could probably get you one, but, did you eat?" Because it was early in the morning. It's like first period. Like, "Did you eat breakfast this morning?" I know where he was living. I said, "Where you're living, they have breakfast." He said, "Well, not this week. They don't have breakfast." I said, "Help me understand." And he said, "Well, if my mom pays by the day, they'll give us breakfast. That's because it costs more. But since this week she was able to get the money and she paid all of it, we can't get breakfast." There's criminality happening. Things have been reported. There's just a lot going on that requires advocacy and understanding when these kids are hungry, when they're tired, when they're confused, when they're stressed, when anger presents in a kid that you don't otherwise see it. Be mindful. There's just so many layers and so much going on. So although I always champion and applaud them maybe for their resilience, the reality is there's such fragility that's also in situations like this. You saw the mothers, they're on the brink, but they're pressing through. That's that mental health piece that needs to be attended to, even if someone's not telling you about it. We got to be mindful of those pieces. So also I want to say, when individuals and families are coming to your schools and they're trying to enroll and you have not seen them before, there's something to be said for presenting barriers that are unnecessary. We know that we have to immediately enroll students. That's a given. Sometimes we're asking for things that they can't come up with at the moment. Like that mom, all of her documents, all of her vital documents were either in her vehicle or perhaps in the storage room that she might have actually just lost and didn't tell you. We want to make sure that we, of course, are following the law and ensuring this is happening. Sometimes you'll get a little pushback in your schools. There have been individuals that still want to say, "I require an affidavit," or something of that nature, knowing that these students qualify for McKinney-Vento federally mandated services. We have to advocate for these students. We have to. So again, not to say that vital documents are not needful and that they will not occur. Certainly they will. But overarchingly, we could probably agree that school is the best place for students in these situations. Any situation, really. But school is going to be the best place. You can have eyes on them. You can make sure that they have food. You can make sure you're loving on them. You make sure they're getting educated. Super important. Super, super important. So with respect to the situations that we've looked at thus far, important considerations are those of health, mental health, physical health, their hygiene, their ability to actually even get cleansed or not, food, whether they have eaten or not, clothing, their responsibilities at home. Some of these parents are working and some of the siblings had to stay home or get another job or babysit to help out, long hours. Think about the family structure and what's actually possible. Perhaps if they are living in a motel room or in a van or outside in a tent, whatever, the ability to have privacy, the ability to have access to technology supports, to get homework done. There's so many things that we can advocate for and speak to. So we need to look at those things. Transportation is always an issue. The fact that families are working maybe hours that they can't get them there on time. Students are coming late and we're thinking they just don't want to come to school. Maybe the parents work an overnight shift. These financial issues, these credit issues, the list really goes on and on with respect to the challenges for these families. So people are experiencing a lot, but we want to be mindful of it as we serve our students. And this really will be our final scenario. It serves as an example of how something as common as a divorce, and I say that because 50% of the people in the U.S. don't stay married. Something as common as a divorce can be an upheaval in your life, how it can shift the dynamics for your family in far-reaching ways. So the implications of that are just huge. I see it all the time. So I guess you want to think about the fact that something like a divorce, situational homelessness, happens quite quickly and unexpectedly for many. So let's go ahead and just kind of take a look at this last one.
Zoe, your bus is here, baby. Where's your book bag? You want a zip? You do? Have a good day, okay? Okay. All right. Love you much. Your homework's in your book bag. Once I got married, I just thought that was the end all, and it was so wonderful and happy. And 20 years later, my whole world is wrecked. With a waiver from Juan, the woman transformed a pumpkin into a coach, 4 mice into white horses and a horse. We were absolutely without a home, car, no transportation, nothing. So it was very fortunate that our family was able to step in, but they could only do so much. And we didn't want to be such a burden on them. And you can only have one mom in the kitchen. We came from a 3-bedroom home, having a backyard, front yard, and so when they would be able to go out in a fenced yard and play around, they're not able to do that anymore. They're not able to connect with other kids the way they were in their neighborhood, and so it becomes very frustrating for them. It's true in a sense that I'm here because I want to be, in the sense that it's better than going from house to house. So this is what I choose to do. Instead of, bugging other people to say, oh, well, can I stay with you? Or splitting up my kids and sending my kids somewhere and then I'm staying here. I was on the waiting list for a shelter for over a year. And the one shelter, I didn't want to be at that one because they would split us up. Even though my son, he was 16, but they were saying, because he would be with my oldest, and I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. So here where we're at right now, it's straight out of my pocket. That was probably my biggest fear, because if I can't keep them in school where they are, and if I can't keep them together, one of your biggest fears is, them being taken away. Their world is already rocked with their situation personally, and being that we were going first from house to house, family to family. I'm just very grateful and very thankful that they're able to stay in their school in Bridgeton. That law has made it so wonderful, being able to stay in the same school even though we're not in the same city. Food is one of the most difficult, because with food, not being able to cook, you can't have a hot plate, you can't have a crock pot, all you have is the microwave. Food is very challenging. Most of my budget when I work 5 days a week, and half my budget is the rent, and then the other half is food, because every day you buy little things that you are able to keep snack wise, but my children, they're used to eating. I was a wife and a mother that cooked every day. They had breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so they're kind of used to that, and so that takes the budget. It's better to be here and we do the things that we need to do, because at least we have 2 beds. When we stayed in one room, all of us was in one room at my mother's house, and all of us was in one room at my sister's house. So my job is a good source of income. It helps us out a lot. It was like the ideal place. Literally, it saved my life. In a home, kids can either go to their room, go outside. Mom can go to the room, outside the kitchen, back porch, front porch, something. If we're frustrated, and we all get frustrated, we have to deal with our frustration. How to get out of it, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out.
was a lot there. But I'm hoping that you heard the mother say that school is her children's bedrock. That, to me, is amazing, and it should really invigorate us and help us to really be emboldened to do the work that we do every day. There's part of that difference making in schools with the work that you do, with the work that everyone around you does. If nothing else, the stability and consistency that you bring in your work makes all the difference. So again, I think these scenarios hopefully have been helpful to help you provide context to the fact, again, that situations are so vastly different and varying, but it gives you a sense of what the kids bring with them to school. They're not just showing up with just a backpack. It's weighted. There's a lot going on there. So the question then becomes, how do we build bridges to success? We have to first be knowledgeable about the requirements of the law. If you don't know what to do, you're not going to know what to do. And it's okay if you're new and you're not well versed in this area. Professional development, learning, gleaning from your colleagues, peers, those who have done this work, super important. Understanding that the implementation has to be done relative to the law and the standards associated with that are huge. Having a mindset of ensuring that stability and consistency are going forward, and always be forward thinking about graduation and beyond. Again, we can't put that in the back of our minds. We have to be thinking about graduation and beyond. So I know counselors know a lot about those EPSOs and those early post-secondary opportunities, college and career. Be thinking about that, those pathways, all of those pieces of things that you know are good practice. Be thinking about that, even though they don't necessarily have the banner of the law. After they graduate, we can set them on the right path to success. Another way to speak to building bridges is collaboration. It is what we're doing here today, and it's what we do hopefully each and every day to make those connections so that we can have resources and support for our students. And so doing that with fidelity and equity. And I know that counselors are very equity minded. We have to keep that on the forefront as well. Just because it looks like I'm giving extra to this particular student, we know that it might just be leveling the playing field a little bit. So we want to make sure that we are providing these services and being responsive with an equitable mindset. Additionally, we need to make sure that identification has to happen as soon as they present at a school, if in fact they do qualify for the services. Because if there's no identification, then there is no access to what students really need. We can help them improve their situations, we can help to remove barriers, and we can give them what they need. That little extra, whatever that is, will really just be equitable. So we have to look and seek to always find opportunities to provide that equitable support. So we begin with identification, and it leads to access so they can succeed. Again, continuing always to emphasize graduation and beyond, to connect them to those resources and to monitor their progress when you help them in some way. We want to monitor how they are, monitor how things are going. That's where it really starts. When I speak to monitoring progress, I know that we do a lot with the social emotional. That's what we do. Nonetheless, the academic is certainly a piece of that academic career and social emotional. I utilize this little template in the work that I do in collaboration with school counselors, because the reality is our ratios are somewhere that we probably can't put our finger on right now, but they're pretty high. And so you can't have eyes and ears and be present in every space. But it still gives you a snapshot of where students are if you collect data on the regular, not just in terms of what your hours look like in terms of service that you're rendering, but their academics. So I send this out to the school counselors that I work with. And at the end of each quarter, we are collecting information, and they don't have to do this. They send it to teachers. So don't think it's an extra haul for you. It's really just a dissemination of information. So this goes to teachers. And if our students have failed a class, failed multiple classes, I'm given this information, lets me know what the student, who they are, what grade they're in, what did they fail and what teacher was that? What was the subject matter? Do they receive intervention services? Are they in grade or credit recovery? What intervention looks like? And vastly important is, what are those strategies that teachers are utilizing to help them to respond to those failing grades? Now, this looks like a lot, but it really is just a snapshot. And what I really appreciate about this, again, the counselor does not have to fill it out. They don't have to do all the work. You are giving it to the teachers who have the know-how and are cognizant of what their academics looks like and their presence in class. But when you get this back, I would look at it very closely to see essentially if there are trends. I always find trends with these things. And what I mean by that is sometimes you'll find that there is a certain class and a certain teacher that all of our students or most of our students are failing. The question then becomes, why is that? Is it a student issue? Is it a teacher issue? Is it a misunderstanding in between? More times than not, I've found that it's been a technology issue and the teacher maybe was not aware and or had a little resistance. Those are spaces for advocacy for our students to turn things around for them academically. So I think that if we have a strong stakeholdership and people understand our presence in buildings and how we're there to help and not have them give me, if you will, then they'll understand the need and necessity for this. So this is just one tool that you can utilize for that progress monitoring. And to also give you a sense of how your kids are doing. Because again, your caseloads are huge. You have lots of things you're responding to, crises, trauma. It's just really important to be able to understand and know what this looks like for each student. And so I would go to what I call the ABCs of helping. If you have a sense of students' attendance, their academics, their behavior, their coursework, and their credit accrual if they're in high school, you'll have a holistic picture of what kind of helping you need to provide, what kind of service or support that you can lend to this student. With respect to the coursework and credit accrual, that's more so I would gear towards the high school counselors that serve our students. I think it's important to be mindful of the fact that without some level of advocacy here, and again, I'm not asking for grades, I'm not asking for you to pass students that have not done work, but the reality is the students' living situation, often highly mobile, impacts this credit accrual piece. I've seen it over and over again. I'll have a student that comes to us right before they were able to take a midterm or right before they were able to finish a final exam. And because of that, even if they've done most of the work and done quite well, that previous school hasn't given a final grade. And then when they get to your school, I don't know if I would say concessions, but what happens in that space between? That's a space for really creative and important conversations to happen to see how students can be supported on their way to graduation. So I can't tell you how to do that, of course, but I think that's conversation with your administrators, with your counselors, with your teachers, whomever touches that student. That's really quite important, but it also can be a barrier if it's not attended to. Most important in this space is to really build a collaborative team. When I think about collaborative teams, I always think about village thinking. Like we're better together, right? So we're going to come together and we're going to try to figure out what we can do to serve all students well. So we want that buy-in and that stakeholder support. And although we don't often say we move mountains, but mountains can move. I say, who knew? I think of recently, within the last few weeks, I was at a school where one of the students was close to me that he was living in a van. He's unaccompanied youth, living in a van, and he had a job and all things that you would think would help him, I suppose, without having a home. It's terrible. But nonetheless, he's had this conversation with me sharing about living in the van. And it got to a point in the conversation that he said that his van was in the parking lot of the school. And I said, I need to understand, what do you mean it's in the parking lot of school? He said, well, he's been driving it to school and parking it outside of his job. And he came out from school the previous day and he tried to start it up and the van wouldn't start. So as we're having this conversation about all the things academic, all the things emotional, all the things that he needs, I come to find 20 minutes into it that the student's van that he sleeps in is actually in the parking lot of the school and it's been there overnight. It's during the cold snap we had. School was canceled. He was freezing and just so many things associated with this. But this is my point when it speaks to a collaborative team and stakeholder support. I asked him if he knew what was wrong with the car. He didn't exactly know, but he thought it might have been a battery. That doesn't sound like a big fix. So I'm thinking, I don't even know how to do that, however, sadly, I don't. But nonetheless, I went to our SROs in the building and I let them know, hey, this kiddo, this is the situation that's going. Are any of you like really good with cars? And they told me they know enough to be dangerous. And I said, well, could you prove it? And I asked them to go out there and check on the kiddo's vehicle. And one of them, he's really good. He actually found out it was not the battery. It was an alternator. So I said, well, what are we going to do about that? So he said, I think I can probably fix it. I can probably get that done. So he called AutoZone. AutoZone was going to go ahead and help him out with it. And when he shared the situation that was for a student who was living in a vehicle, AutoZone decided they were going to donate the alternator to us. So I said, this is spectacular. Maybe we can get someone to fix it. Well, there's 2 SROs. Someone else is really handy too. You actually think you can fix an alternator before school is out at 3:30? He said, I actually think I can. So here I go. Prove it, please. So once again, we have another collaborative stakeholder on board, and they were able to get it to the shop. They had to kind of pull it, but to the collision shop on campus, and they were able to fix the student's vehicle by the end of the day. Now, does that change his entire life? By no means, but that's just an example of how sometimes we have not because we ask not. Be bold, be courageous, ask the question. I mean, I didn't even know the SROs that well, because I'm always in the building moving and doing things, but I see them and I speak to them. And people were going, are you really going to ask them? And I thought, all they can say is, no, we're in the same spot. It's okay. Do what you can to help people. So again, the importance of collaborative team is just so far reaching. I can't even tell you how happy it makes me that there's those kind of linkages in schools everywhere. This right here seems like a weird thing to put in between, but I'm going to say it's not, because the reality is tending to these students and all the other things. Some counselors have very administrative duties with 504s and IEPs, all kinds of things. The reality is your work is a lot of work. What you do every day adds up. It adds up. So while you're helping others, you must always be mindful to help yourself. I say that to say that self-care just is not selfish. I know that some of us were raised thinking that having maternal guilt and all these things, if you did something for yourself, you need to prioritize your health. You have to be in a healthy mindset to serve. I would even say, as a counselor, I believe it's part of our ethical responsibility to ensure that you're showing up in a competent way, that you can serve others. So if you can't even do it for yourself, do it by virtue of the fact that you're in alignment with your profession. You have to think of putting yourself into the equation to be able to be helpful to serve people. I think of it as a mother. I really never had the maternal guilt thing. I stayed at home for a decade, but I never had it because I always thought that I could not pour from an empty cup. So if I didn't do what I need to do for me, I'm certainly not going to be able to help my family. And it's the same mindset. You can't pour from an empty cup. So take care of yourself. Put that oxygen mask on. Do what you need to do to show up as your best self every day. And always remember that compassion fatigue is real. I've experienced it. I'm sure that many of you have. You have to tend to first things first when it comes to you as well, so that you can tend to those who you love and those who you serve in schools every day. So I really just want to put a pin in the importance of exercising self-care. That's for any helper. That's really for any human being. But if nothing else, because you help, make sure you help yourself too. So back to that team. Who is on that team? Your district should have a homeless district liaison. You'll have school level supports. There'll be counselors. I don't know if everyone has access to some of the mental health additives that we have, like Centerstone and behavioral health services. But if you have those in the building, great linkages. Teachers, of course, your administrators, your interventionists, bus drivers, community stakeholders, students, families, SROs, all of these individuals should be on your team, because collaboration always enhances our work. Always enhances our work. So we don't want to work in silos. We don't want to be lone rangers. Well, at least I don't. I think we're always better together. So with that belief, I kind of just leave you with this. I ask you to please remember the significance of a team, and know that every kid is one caring adult away from being a success story. I've seen it happen. I've experienced it myself. We really all make a difference. And just links to that and hold that dear as you do your work. And I know that you do, because this work, again, a big haul, a huge undertaking that you show up for every day. I'm so appreciative of the service that you render. But just remember that you are making a difference on those tired days, on those long days, on those days where you may not feel the appreciation of this school counselor week, because this week happens once a year. And I know that. But I want you to remember that as you go forward, the vast importance and vital importance of the work that you do. It's life-changing. It can change cycles. It can break homelessness. It can break barriers. It's immense. So again, I applaud you. I thank you. And I ask you to remember that. We're going to do questions in just a moment. I do want to go by for just a second to say, for policy and practice, if anyone's new or unfamiliar with this work, you can find a lot of information to assist you in what you do. For the National Center for Homeless Education, NCHE is their acronym. Schoolhouse Connections, they do a lot of policy and advocacy out of Washington, D.C. NAC, the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth. They do a ton to help educate us on serving this wonderful population. Okay. Lastly, again, I am Dr. Keisha Napper. If I can help you, assist you, serve you in any way, connect you to something, provide some training, whatever that is, please feel free to reach out. You can connect at napperconsultingservices.com. And very lastly, I just want to make sure that I thank Dr. Wilson, thank Dr. Clark, thank Miss Jenny Marsh, the entire team over there at the Media Center. Didn't know about you. So glad I got to know you. What a blessing and a privilege. And all of you watching, if you would just scan this QR code and give me a little feedback to let me know if there's some other way that I could provide support or something that maybe was missing. So if I ever present somewhere again, that I can share that. Because again, we just need to do this collective work the best way we can. And I appreciate and applaud everyone. Thank you so much.
Dr. Napper, I have no words. That was quite a compelling presentation. And Dr. Wilson is going to come on here in a moment, and we have some questions from viewers. So Dr. Wilson, I will give it to you, and I'll come back, Dr. Napper, before you leave after Q&A. So Dr. Wilson, if you'll take.
Yeah, so thank you so much again for that wonderful presentation. It was very powerful, very informative. One of the first questions we got was, I have several students that live in campers. If they don't have water, is this a DCS report?
I was going to say, yeah, we unfortunately, yes. However, I wish I had a little back and forth with that scenario, because sometimes parents don't have things that we could link them up, provide service or help with. So there's a little trickiness for me to give a one all be all answer on that, because has support been attempted to be provided where we can help the family sustain, whatever standard of living that they have, that it's also habitable and that it's reasonable and not substandard. So if everything has been exhausted and done, and that's just that situation, then by all means, we know that that's not a good situation for a student. But again, I know it sounds like it depends. It's always that kind of stickiness. If I had the back and forth to know what has been done thus far, or is it a choice, so in general, yes. However, has something been done to try to get them on a better footing, to provide support in that family to kind of keep that unit together and our other pieces intact that are good.
Thank you. And the next one is, how do you support migrant students or students who are refugees who are experiencing homelessness?
That's, again, another loaded one. We are getting more and more migrant students. I think within our district, again, there's different services that are offered that we may offer that you don't. But I would say you could go for best practice to NCHE, the National Counselors for Homeless Education. They actually have a guideline for it's called MEP, for actually supporting the education of migrant students, best practices, and some resources there. You can find them. I'll say we don't have our infrastructure and our capacity is not such that I would say that we are the signpost for that at this juncture, because it's really new to us. We are having a center within our district. I don't know if you had that dedicated to supporting students, ELL and ESL. So I don't know that everyone has that coordinates or ability. But if you do not, I would say go there for resources that you can actually contact them. There's a lot of information there that can help support your work, and maybe they can point you somewhere in your vicinity that regionally that can be helpful to you for some more information. Because again, even though it sounds like one thing, they're very context specific, because what's available in a metropolitan area versus a rural area versus suburban area is going to look a lot different. So I really can't speak to it totality, but I would say go there. They are great for research and resources in that specific area.
Thank you. Another question we received are just in general, what are some preventative measures or policies that districts can do or incorporate to stabilize or decrease the students who are experiencing homelessness?
Okay, so the question, I want to make sure I'm clear, to stabilize them or decrease the homelessness?
Right, to either stabilize to keep it from increasing, or to just decrease the number of students who are experiencing homelessness.
I understand. And this is not an exciting answer, but the reality is it's actually bigger than us at this juncture, because it has to do with policy. So I guess I can put a pin there and say advocacy is super important, not just in your building, though. Like I'm talking about going to Capitol Hill. I'm talking about going to your state legislator, things like that can make real differences, because the way that costs are rising, the way that we don't have necessarily infrastructure in our own town, like this is a large city that we live in, and we do what we can to be responsive. But if we want to be real, we really don't have a shelter. We don't have fundamental support. So I hear people say, just go to the shelter. what shelter? I mean, there's some spaces, I'm sure you know, Dr. Wilson, we really don't have that capacity and infrastructure in our own town. So they sound great, and they are great when they can add value. But if it does not exist in your area, then I'm just kind of speaking to the wind. So I would say really advocacy and also collaboration, though. I know that we have those local communities and care forces that get together and try to help with housing advocacy and making sure it's there, getting on those local boards and linkages. I mean, ground level work is really where it is, because again, there's a lot that we want to make available to people and we think it makes sense, and it does make sense, but it's actually not here. So therein lies the challenge over and over. So if we can kind of come together to make some of those things happen, and perhaps, start with a place like this, brainstorming, having collaboration, thinking, what is the action plan? Let's do something actionable. So I think that's a greater conversation that can take place. I appreciate that question.
And then somebody sent one on, do you know any specific legislation now that school counselors can advocate for to better support students who are experiencing homelessness?
I understand. The last one that I was associated with was the FAFSA simplification bill, but I will say the best place that I know of right now would be Schoolhouse Connections. They have a spectacular group of individuals that do advocacy. They're always on the Hill. So they'll even let you join them to do some advocacy. That's where I did it before. You can join them. They'll have all the policies. They will send out, you go on their email list, they will send out what's hot. Like they call it what's hot on the Hill, actually. And it will come right to you. Let's say, we're advocating for this policy. We need you to email this person. We need you to do this. Go ahead to schoolhouseconnections.org, I believe it is. Yes, that's a great place for policy and advocacy information. They're on the Hill. They're placed there. They got a whole team.
Excellent. Thank you so much for all these extra links and information for us to continue doing this work. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Clark. Do you have any other questions that you could add to this conversation?
Yes, I actually do. I have another one. Because we serve, as you've mentioned, Dr. Napper, urban districts, suburban districts, rural districts, districts with lots of resources, districts with fewer resources. My question is, and this is my question, are there any mechanisms typically in place in most communities, in most counties, in most local government systems? Are there mechanisms in place that schools could go to or counselors could contact who might be a starting point for supporting children who are homeless in a school district?
Yes, I understand what you're saying. I would say I can't really point to a general one that occurs everywhere. I've seen it, I want to, unfortunately to say, sporadically as far as the undertaking. But I will say everyone is mandated to have a homeless liaison within their school district. I would say that individual has a lot of interaction with state and federal policy to do the daily work that they do. And I would actually say kind of start closer to home, and maybe they can kind of field you out to the places that you need to be. Because I would say doing this work that I'm doing, I don't have a place that I go to all the time to get this vast information. Of course, those community connections, those stakeholder collaborations, you get pieces, but I would not say there's like a storehouse for all of it that I've encountered thus far. But again, I would say just start basic with what's in your district, because that person has to be familiar with the law and the resources associated with serving this population of students. So they might be a much better person to answer that than I at this juncture.
Dr. Napper, thank you from the bottom of my heart, Dr. Napper, for being with us and taking the time to give us this extended presentation today on a very important topic that impacts all school districts. So many thanks, Dr. Napper.
Thank you so much.
Hope to see you again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.